I'm Matthew Hindson. I'm a composer and I'm presently the Deputy Head of School and Deputy Dean at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music, part of the University of Sydney. Finding one's voice as a composer is in fact the most interesting and the most important thing for any composer to do. I don't know, like how did I find my voice? It's a process. When I'm talking to my students now, it's a long process, and composers, unlike performers, for example, who might start their studies all really accomplished, composers are starting their tertiary studies right at the very beginning. But I do seem to think that I did have something to say, particularly from about third year university, which was about 1988, so a long time ago. And I remember a piece I wrote then called Mass, which was very forthright and making big statements and very bold, and that was part of the journey of finding my own voice. I like to think that my music has always, well, when it was good, was always engaging and was really about saying something, whatever that was. It could have been something aggressive and violent, or it could have been something extremely beautiful. The process of finding my own voice developed from those early formative years as an undergraduate composer, through my studies in Melbourne, through working with composers like Peter Sculthorpe and Ross Edwards, through working with superb performers, and in my case a lot of it came through experiencing forms of music which were then quite new, so techno and death metal, and then being able to work those into compositional frameworks from a classical perspective, which is where I came from. You never know when you're going to hear something or experience something that will change the way that perhaps you think about music, or indeed anything. So yeah, my musical influences have included things like techno and death metal, but not only that, they've included things like, I remember there was one stage where I was into Indian, Fijian pop music and looking at how they did things. I was talking to a student earlier today about my piece Lament for cello and piano, which was inspired, if you like, by the emotional background and the emotional journey that followed the Port Arthur massacre back in 1997, or I think it was. So I'm very much a composer of today. I like to be influenced by what happens today, because otherwise I just don't see why I would even bother. You hear music by Beethoven and Brahms, for example, and you think, well, that's such amazing music. Or Debussy, who's having a 100-year anniversary this year. You think, well, look how these people did it. Why would I even bother? And I think it's partly because they didn't have the experience as a contemporary Australian living in the 21st century. We live in a different society. We live in a much more pluralistic society than they would have ever dreamed possible. And so that feeds into how I create music. My influences have always been eclectic, actually, and it's sort of back in the early 90s when I was trying to really discover what I was doing. There was very much then a sense of, you must do it this way, particularly when I was studying in Melbourne. You must do it this way, this is the way to do it. And I wasn't really interested in doing it that way. So I think as you get older, I mean, you do change, and sometimes I hear some of the music I wrote back when I was younger, and it's like, where did this even come from? How did I have the energy to even write this music? Look, in terms of influences, I've always been very much in favour of writing music which has some sort of basis in emotional content, and really needs to speak to me when I'm writing it. And then that hasn't changed.